Okay, I think we are live now and we can get started. Uh, Everyone, welcome to week 6 of the Oxford Strategic Studies Group events. We are back online because we have an excellent guest from overseas, overland, coming to talk to us about maritime maritime domain, which is one of the areas that the Strategic Studies Group always wants to keep in mind as a center of their focus throughout their years. Well, we already had a couple of events on maritime issues, but this we are very much looking forward to another perspective, and this time we're going to shift the focus to the Indo-Pacific. And I think many of us are a bit overwhelmed by news about what's happening in eastern Ukraine, so we might as well go down to another part, warmer seas, warmer waters, and see what the geopolitical situation is there. So I'm honored to introduce Commodore Abhay Singh, who is a research fellow at the Military Affairs Center at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi, and he's calling us from there. He is an Indian Navy veteran with extensive command and staff experience spanning 27 years. A surface warfare officer with a specialization in missile gunnery warfare, he has commanded various naval platforms, which include frontline frigate, submarine rescue and deep diving vessel, and fleet auxiliary. He has also served as Director of Military Affairs in the Disarmament and International Security Division of the Ministry of External Affairs. Comrade Singh is an alumnus of the Naval Academy, Defense Service Staff Course, and Naval War College. He has an MSc on Defense and Strategic Studies from the University of Chennai and an MPhil from Mumbai University. His publications include Maritime Exclusion Zone, Legal Perspective and Strategic Option from Maritime Affairs in 2008, Cross LOC Strike and India's Reputation for its Oil, and the Admiralty, Jurisdiction and Settlement of Maritime Claims Bill 2016, the long journey of an important maritime legislation. So today we can talk about exclusion zone, control of the seas, but also legal aspect. It's a very interesting set of publication, Commodore, sorry. Well, Admiral isn't either. So the title of Commodore Singh talk is on China-India relations and the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific. You have you would talk for about 25 minutes. Then we will open up to Q&A, both from the chat and from YouTube. Admiral, again, Commodore, I'm sorry. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your very kind introduction. Uh, I am going to share my views, but I take this as a more opportunity to learn from the wider audience participating in this event. So let me begin by first, there is a very small presentation. Let me share my screen and we okay. Can you hear me? Can you see my
Yes,
presentation?
yes, that's perfect.
Okay. Okay. So this is a disclaimer. Normally, I used to put it when one was there part of for track one processes and when you make public speech, but some event in our institution has made me revisit this, so I make it clear that I speak for myself and views expressed in has no bearing on the views of my institute or government of India. Okay, now my topic today is Indo-Pacific geopolitics and how does it shape India-China relationship. And I'm going to first talk about Indo-Pacific and why this region is important. This is widely considered as a center of gravity of uh, economic and strategic interest of global. Half of the world population, dynamic Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia resources, Middle East and Africa combine this region. Of course, it's a confluence of both Indian Ocean and Pacific. and more so, it's a strategic highway of global commerce. Now, often there is a discourse that Indo-Pacific is a newer geopolitical construct which came into 21st century in fashion. Actually, if one sees, this is the trade map of the historical trade connection in the Indo-Pacific region, which was primarily maritime even before the power vessel made the advent because of the predictable monsoon winds. And there was a deep trade and cultural connections between Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean which existed. Even colonial time, these lines of communication were shaped a bit, but it still, in a different manner, continue to exist. And fundamentally, these are two of one is the Mackinder construct of heartland, and another is rimland. And both of them theoretically, Mackinder refers as the monsoon land, which essentially saw the Indian Ocean and Pacific both combined. And even Speakman, who didn't agree on many things which Mackinder said, his rimland conceptualization also saw the region as a uh, unif- uh, unified geopolitical construct. Often we forget that actually there was a treaty in post-war era, Indo-Pacific Fishery Council, which was established. Now we know it as a Asia Pacific Fishery Commission. And of course, the shape is slightly different. But if you see the geographical span, essentially it meets the what we consider today as the Indo-Pacific region. Now, some even argue that a proto-Indo-Pacific construct was even present in the Bandung Conference when Asia-Africa Conference at Bandung had a actually similar geographical construct of creating a unified region. Of course, it didn't work out because of the schism again between India and China. And this is what the Cold War did essentially about the fragmentation in Asia, and regional security complexes began to shape up in a different manner. In 50, it was largely between the uh, Soviet Union led formations and the US led the Cold War dimensions as it happened. But subsequently, even the 60s, the regional processes began to evolve in a different manner, where ASEAN and Asia Pacific geopolitical construct emerged. And progressively, Asia Pacific got ascendance in 70s and 80s for regions. And at the same time, actually, Indian Ocean became progressively disengaged from the because India itself got regionally disengaged after 60s and 70s, began to consolidate itself in South Asia and became a champion of global South, transcending the regional geopolitics. And hence the cartographic separation between Indian and Pacific Ocean became a geopolitical reality. This in say after the Cold War, Indo-Pacific emerged fundamentally because the globalization-led economic growth began to coalesce the economic and strategic interest, which brought the strategic homogeneity. This AIS map of the region essentially signifies how region got intensely connected, both as a trade for resources and market both. Uh, Economic network began to expand and integrate the maritime Indo-Pacific regional approaches, which was there in till about 90s, where regions by themselves had become to coalesce. They started to transcend their sub-regional approaches to become little more inclusive. uh, of course, these overlapping of strategic and economic interest was driven by the growing trade, and which reflected in a continuous sea lanes. Of course, greater visualization came in because the challenges to good order at sea, and fundamentally because of the piracy and terrorism, both at Malacca Strait and the Gulf of Aden, uh, provided the sense of unified map of the region. One of the another factor was rising China, whose economic growth was both as a intense interest to the region and beyond, and at the same time source of strategic anxiety. And this became to shape the map of the region, where the cartographical separation between the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean began to diminish. At the same time, this, while had a shape in terms of bringing in expanding ASEAN's network between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, others interest, economic interest, the views of major actors, means the US, Japan, India, Australia, began to converge and take a common shape. Similarly, China's own interest began to expand and started to see as a continuous region. Now, this overlapping interest has a bearing on India-China relationship, and it accentuated strategic dilemma. While China increasingly started to becoming concerned with potential challenges to securing its expanding sea lines, and hence in order to expand its trade and the connectivity, it began to invest in certain maritime infrastructure in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. These dots got connected with the Booz Allen Hamilton report, and which gave us a another term called string of pearls, which projected in the map started to begin act as a source of concern to India. India began to feel being hemmed in from all sides by the Chinese maritime infrastructure. Now, herein I plug in the key issue, which is my book was published last year, and essentially this book is a study on the India-China rivalry, and I argue that I contest a prevalent notion which argues that India-China rivalry is one-sided or asymmetric. Fundamentally, because while India views China as a major threat, and there is a growing power asymmetry between China and India, India is a lower order threat for China. My argument in this book is essentially that while it is true that India views China as a major threat, but China has begun to take India rather seriously. And I go into analyze that essentially a rival image of India has existed since the time of independence of the both countries, India's independence and China be forming itself in what we call a modern state of China. Uh, and even historically, there are four interrelated images of India which has existed in China. One as that even in the colonial time, uh, and these are existed from then, that India is viewed as a kind of potential threat. May not be immediately, but could emerge as a potential threat. At the same time, China considered itself civilizationally superior to India, particularly India being a large country, was colonized for almost 200 years, while China, despite being trouble, had a continuity or was never colonized. That's been argued. At the same time, progressively got added at the time of independence that India wishes to inherit the colonial design of its influence in Asia, and hence it ascribes a hegemonic aspirations. And of course, India's propensity to align with the West is seen as a China as a threat. Somehow, while India at the time of independence had welcomed China into the field and acted in order to introduce communist China to the wider world. These four early negative perception of India has somehow formed a enemy image, and essentially, as things unfolded, these formed the basis of rivalry initiation. And while and initially, because both countries themselves considered themselves as civilizational states, initial rivalry was rooted in positional aspirations of both countries, which later became of because of the cartographic uh, uh, difference of opinion about the cartographical limit of their modern states. So positional rivalry became special, and later became complex rivalry, which combined both positional and spatial aspect. And of course, we know that India China fought a war, and that did end it well with India. And even when China has managed to better India in a conflict, continue to perceive India as a potential threat even then. And some of these references are available in the discussion which Nixon had with people, Republic of China, at the time in 70s. So actually, by 80s, relationships has normalized to some extent, and wherein threat has begun to ameliorate. But again, after 90s, uh, India again began to emerge on the Chinese radar. Now, my book fundamentally provides the historic context of the rivalry, but more important is how to our discussion today is about how China's view on Indo-Pacific has been shaping, and how much did it affect the India-China relationship. Now, essentially, my inferences are based on Chinese publications, and which I have some of them are listed here on the screen from 2010 onwards. And fundamentally, even though China doesn't agree with the Indo-Pacific, the Chinese scholars have been uh, studying this approach very intensely. And broadly, Indo-Pacific in the Chinese scholars' analysis is equal to Quad. Quad and Indo-Pacific constructs are interchangeable. They considered as a geographical concept, a geopolitical concept, and a specific policy initiative. Progressively, since the beginning, it was a concept. Now they consider as a Indo-Pacific strategy, and they argue that it has shaped because of growing economic and strategic linkages between Indian Ocean and Western Pacific, which is the traditional assessment of the Indo-Pacific construct. But what does it aims to? And that's where the China's views becomes little strong. They say that it's a strategy aimed to contain China by creating a group of country, click ASEAN, NATO, Cold War bloc, and it's a Indo-Pacific strategic arc to contain China. Fundamentally, it aims to undermine China's regional leadership by promoting Indo-Pacific multipolarization. And more so, which is related to China's concern, is that they consider that Indo-Pacific strategy, which is of a United States origin, aims to enhance strategic profile as a regional balancer. And this is where they spend quite some time analyzing, and they constantly argue that in from 2013 that while China is facing uh, a strategic challenge in its expansion in the regional influence, where India's influence is being facilitated by United States. And one of the greater challenges that China considers that Pacific region, that East Asia and South China Sea is primarily the primary strategic direction, and Indian Ocean is a secondary strategic direction. But Indo-Pacific concept integrated these both strategic spaces and complicates the India's China's strategic approach towards ensuring its peripheral security. In other words, what China says that since these two regions has been linked, China faces a potential challenge. Means that if it wishes to uh, if it enhances, it makes a certain action in the primary area of strategic interest. At that time, the pushback would come from the secondary area of interest. And if, say, if takes any action against India or in Indian Ocean, the pushback will come from the Pacific direction. So this is where the China's complications with the Indo-Pacific construct arises, and that has given provided increasingly complexity and concern in India-China relationship in what we see in about last 7-8 years. These overlapping strategic sphere of influence has growing salience of Indian Ocean and strategic uncertainty, given rise to the strategic uncertainty. China considers that India-China relationships faces 4C conundrum, that is simultaneous existence of conflict, competition, coordination, and cooperation at bilateral, regional, and global level. Conflictual inherent the conflictual tendencies are India's approach towards Tibet, Dalai Lama. Competition is in terms of strategic influence in South Asia, Southeast Asia, even wider Indo-Pacific region. Uh, but at the same time, this is coordination and cooperation. But remember this 4C conundrum. These documents illustrate primarily in uh, year 12, 13, 14. But progressively, these cooperation and coordination has diminished their approach. Another issue where there the China feels that progressively India has become assertive in its foreign policy and acted to constrain China's engagement in South Asia and Indian Ocean region. China considers Indian Ocean region as a key area of its strategic interest because of access to market and resources. China also argues that India follows a Monroe Doctrine in South Asia and Indian Ocean regions, means that it wishes itself as an exclusive area of influence and it doesn't want anybody in this region. Some of the Chinese scholars have argued that essentially India's strategic concept includes to defeat Pakistan, deter China, and constrain United States. And it says that while India has managed to achieve vis-a-vis Pakistan to some extent, it is trying to deter actively China. And once achieved that, the next target of India's approach will be to remove the United States from the region. Uh, Agree or disagree, but this is the view which exists. But however, more serious complaint of China has been from India is about India's approach towards One Belt, One Road, or which initially China was very optimistic that India, despite having some reservation, will not oppose it outright. And initially they said even if India opposes, it will not affect much. But progressively, since 16, 17, 18, China has begun to express the views that India's opposition to abhor is affecting the implementation of its plan, particularly India hyping up the debt trap diplomacy. Another region where even it considers that India is following something called a four no characteristics in the foreign policy towards China. And essentially, it says that India foreign policy give no consideration to bilateral relationship, given its the rising engagement, rising profile in the Indo-Pacific region and its own economic and strategic growth. It has no concern with the China's retaliatory response. China doesn't, India doesn't have no consideration for reciprocity. Rather, India pays scant regard to reciprocity in the bilateral relationship in China, while it seeks assurances, support from China on the issue uh, in its diplomatic approach, but doesn't take into account China's sensitivity on various issues. And actually, India wants a no escalation but continued tension to complicate China's approach. And essentially, if uh, since Doklam and to what happened in Galwan, actually, what we have seen is the multitude built up of a multitude of crises over a period of time, and these crises is defined as a new normal in bilateral relationship. Now, where do we go from here? Actually, very short point is that geopolitical realignment and balance of power of the regional equation is still evolving. What we have is still simultaneous existence of cooperative, competitive, and conflictual impulses. As of now, the cooperative element is low, but if you see, even despite all their difficulty, we had a kind of trade uh, with China, which last year was 100 billion. But competitive conflictual impulses are even more in a sharper focus, or rather upfront. Now, in my view, India-China relationship appears to be at an inflection point, and future trajectory remains uncertain. There are three possible pathways. One, that restrained ambivalence, which had actually existed in a pre-Doklam period. Will we revert back to that stage? It seems difficult at times, but one need to wait and watch. At present, we are what we consider the India-China Cold War, a kind of strange neighborhood where there is a existing tension. Uh, was possible pathways which we can envision is a potentially armed conflict. Nobody wants it, but we cannot deny that the threat exists. So what I'll do, I'll stop here and wait for further questions, comments, if any.
Well, thank you very much, Commodore, for this excellent, brief but to the point presentation of the issues that concern the Indo-Pacific, obviously a central theater of the global, geopolitics in general and international relations. I found it very, very interesting, especially when you discussed the cartographic aspect of it and how the cartographic element and the politics of basically regionalism, then eventually led to this distinction between Indian and Asia Pacific as to different concepts or different areas. I'll hold on the questions for now. So I just want, but I will have some. So if anyone is interested in posing a question, just let me know by raising your hand, just like Lydia just did, and I'll give her the floor in a second. If anyone is listening to us or watching us on YouTube, please feel free to type in your question on the chat, and I already seen one. So without further ado, Lydia, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Commodore. Thank you, Giuseppe. Also, can you
We
hear me?
can barely hear you, Lydia. If there's
If I talk very loud
better,
for me, is that okay?
that's good. That's good.
Excellent. Sorry about that. Thank you, Commodore. You've talked about what China perceives India as doing and how China believe that India were trying to contain them, for example. What is India actually trying to do vis-a-vis China, as opposed to what the Chinese think India were trying to do? Thank you very much.
Remember, we're not under Chatham House rules, so the Commodore is restrained probably in what he can say.
No, I told you I began by showing that disclaimer and essentially the constraint which the candid discussion can have it. Okay, insofar as what India wants from China. And actually, India has been upfront in stating that. However, international relation signals often get distorted by the noise in the environment. Uh, India has been saying that India-China relationship is largely dependent upon the way we are able to progress upon the resolving our boundary disputes. Progressive. That has been one primary that we cannot have at one point that we leave a border dispute to the history and continue to progress on other pathways. So that's one concern. Now, another issue which India has been consistently wanted that while China both has a economic complementarity to quite an extent. And however, the bilateral trade is disbalanced and disbalanced fundamentally relating to certain kind of selective constraining trade policy from China. So we have been appealing them to have a relook on the providing us the access where there is a market. And China, both in particularly even official or even in their scholarly approach, has been arguing that probably Indian products has a very limited market in China. Uh, however, that is not what India assesses to be accurate assessment. So fundamentally, it's true that we will continue to progress by talking on the divergences, which are critical divergences on our boundary disputes. At the same time, we continue to progress bilaterally on the issue of providing a mutual access on the trade. These are two issues. Fundamentally, there are plenty of issues which India China agrees upon, or for that matter, issues related to broader climate change, accesses, capacity building, capability building approaches, everything good which we can talk about. But there are two significant issues which remain. Now there is another quibble about is the transparency in the regional engagement by the partners. As if China continue to remain engaged in the South Asia for the region, India expects a kind of transparency. Uh, that's another difficulty is from India's side.
Okay, thank you, Commodore, and thank you, Lydia, for the question. I don't see other hands in the chat. Oh, wait, we just had one. So, Captain Reid, please, Philip.
Hello, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Okay, Commodore Philip Reid, thank you ever so much for agreeing to talk to us today. As you know, a former fellow with yourself at the IDSA and presently a fellow at the CCW Centre in Oxford. My question is on the subject of the port of Gwadar, an issue very close to the heart of many in the Indian analytical community. Obviously, this is a 20-year narrative. This was a Musharraf era project, and we've seen waxing and waning of this in the media over the course of the last 20 years, but really relatively so, pretty little on the ground. And I just want to know from New Delhi the perspective there. Do you think that what we've witnessed over the course of the last 20 years has been a form of Chinese major power diplomacy with Chinese characteristics in terms of their ability to use that port to strategically signal in a very subtle manner their incoming presence into the region, or do you simply think it's been a chaotic, haphazard rolled out project, exacerbated and sort of turned into hyperbole by the Pakistani media in particular? Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Reed. And I was speaking to the chair earlier that I have a very fond memory of our association. And thank you very much. You have been key that to introduce me to the union, which makes this event possible. And thank you very much for your question. And fundamentally, Gwadar has been in a discourse. Now, I have been watching this very carefully for last 15 years. Development in Gwadar as it progresses. Now, despite the media as it projects that strategic potential of Gwadar in terms of, say, potentially it could be next base of the PLA Navy in Indian Ocean, or a major trade route to the China through the CPEC. Now, or as Gwadar was being projected as next Singapore or probably Dubai in terms of being a facilitator or a key driver of the economic revival of Pakistan. Actually, these are futures which we are still waiting to realize. Gwadar potential as a vibrant port has not lived up to the expectation, despite now the China, actually this is being done by a Chinese firm. Trade flow from Gwadar thoroughfare put to China is minimal. Even to Pakistan has not. Pakistan itself has not capitalized Gwadar as a major port for itself. They continue to prefer Karachi for the region. Now, whether Chinese investment are fundamentally that it is not related to trade, they are looking for potentially a strategic basing facility. That has also not yet materialized. But if China was to set up a second base in the Indian Ocean region, despite people are talking about 10, 12 places where China could probably seek a permanent base for its naval facilities in Indian Ocean region. But my bet will be if they decide to go beyond Djibouti, probably Gwadar would be a opportunity. But again, given the difficulty with the Baluch, which continue to exist, I remain even doubtful about that. So things are in short fluid.
Excellent. Thank you for the answer. Thank you, Captain Reed, for the question. Now I'm going to turn to the chat on YouTube. We have a question from John Chapman, who asks, do the spiritual heritages of China and India influence their view of global strategy? So we're broadening question to spiritual heritages.
I couldn't get the question, please. Can you repeat?
Okay, I repeat. Do the spiritual heritages of China and India influence their view of global strategy?
Oh,
it's a broad question. I'm just gonna copy paste it here. Just
okay. Now, actually, in diplomatic articulation, both in India and China both continue to draw heavily from the civilizational heritage, and that is again there's of the logic in order to explain probably the kind of benevolence approach to the realpolitik the countries have largely reflected in their spiritual prescription. That is a given. However, China actually, Chinese scholars are very seriously exploring about the non-Western IR theories and drawing from the strongly from their cultural and strategic heritages in order to explain their worldview. Uh, Even India, for that matter, is drawing or deepening its research fundamentally in terms to that how much and where is the relevance of our own spiritual historical guidances available in scriptures. And these are is a methodology I think that both countries are trying to uh, explain themselves in a modern world in terms of how much consistency in values and approach which they have, and how much in, say again, in a practical terms this will shape their view is not, but in terms to explain or to exemplify their behavior, which rather that how much to the ideal they have, they will continue to exhort those values.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this answer. For now, we don't have any questions. I will jump in if possible. And I have a few. So one question I wanted to ask is about the link between sea confrontation or sea competition potentially and land disputes. So over the past few months, I don't remember if it was this year or the past, there was again armed confrontation between China and India at the border in the mountains. So obviously, they're being two very large countries, continent size. They and the distance is huge, and these two countries are both a confrontation, potentially at interaction at sea and also on land. They share a border. So my question is, if indeed this there is potential for no for non-confrontation or ambivalence in a sense at sea, is it the same inland? And the second half of this question is, does to what extent are the two issues connected? Can you see uh peaceful coexistence between India and China at sea, while there is issues where there are issues at land which every now and then escalate? Does it happen?
Okay, one, that strategic geography has a bearing on state behavior. That is given. Now, India and China have a geographical connect. We share land boundary, which is disputed and remains a source of concern. But remember this, that our maritime geography is slightly different. Fundamentally, that both countries are oriented again. If you are saying Indo-Pacific, China is oriented towards Pacific, and India is centered on Indian Ocean. Means that while we are joint on the continent, we are separated by the ocean, and that's where is you need to see that uh, essentially that if there is a say open conflict between the two countries, how much it will result in a confrontation at sea. And I think that's what your part of first part of the question. Now in this is where some of the Indian strategic analysts have been arguing about the India's advantage in the maritime arena. While on the land, Himalaya is a insurmountable boundary, which limits the approaches on which uh, India and China both can kinetically engage, or there is a limited means mobilization, how much you can progress into each other territory. In maritime world, fundamentally because a very large portion of China's trade and more importantly, China's oil passes through the Indian Ocean sea lanes. Now, security of those extended sea lanes is China's strategic challenge, and that has been a clear driver of their naval power aspiration, that how to protect these extended line of communication from Chinese coast to. Now China has a another complication in the maritime geography, because we know the island chains, but fundamentally access to the Indian Ocean is through a series of choke points. Now, in order to China to project maritime power in Indian Ocean region, China need to dominate those choke points, and those choke points are controlled by Southeast Asian countries, fundamentally Indonesia, or other side Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, the Malacca Strait downwards. Unless China is able to completely influence, put their side these uh, Southeast Asian countries, or able to dominate them completely, China's unhindered access in Indian Ocean is a challenge. And given the distance, even though the China has a one of the fastest growing navy in the world, still China's ability to spare a resident naval power in the Indian Ocean remains limited, because the certain kind of adverse configuration continue to exist in its maritime vicinity as such, and which I told you in my presentation is the primary strategic direction. So till such time those primary strategic direction continue to bother him, his ability to project power in the secondary direction remains challenged. In that case, China is open, or rather, China is vulnerable to certain kind of coercive power, which India, being a working through what we call interior lines in the Indian Ocean, can project. And so this is where the advantages lie. So on a China's ability to uh, pressurize, I'm not saying the conflict, in a coercive behavior, China has a limitation of how much pressure it can put on our continental boundary to shape our behavior, because on the other side, if things goes a little better, the vulnerability will continue to enhance on the maritime front. And fundamentally, that's why the analysts in India, they continue to talk about that ability to build facilities in our island territories, which could act against for the strategic purpose. Then again, there is another direction that India needs a certain kind of naval power to build or retain its influences in the region. Now, China worry is not that what India can do it's on its own. China's more worry is what kind of India can do with the partnership with others, and fundamentally here comes Quad in play again. So now these will are the uh, generally developments in what will play in the Indian Ocean and Pacific in the Sino-Indian dynamics. Now, however, you remember, you may just see this despite the continuing tension on nearly 2 years on the borders. Uh, we have not seen a certain kind of any kind of pressure development on the maritime front. Particularly, you need to see that behavior, a state's approach to influence or building a power dynamics in international waters is governed by a certain kind of law. So you cannot, you are inhibited from doing certain things at sea till such time there is a very overt declaration of hostility between the countries concerned. So these are the power play which will continue to jostle with each other. Now, one thing which in my book I have mentioned, that post Doklam, one of the Chinese analysts had argued that while India had managed to maintain a detent a sort of Indo-Clum, or whoever you agree from, whether India was managed to probably get a better hand, or at least not allow China to do something. It's a matter of details. But they say that in future, if there is a kind of pressure on the China's land boundary, China will bring the sea power into the play. Now, how this sea power will play remain unsaid. But then again, probably it's not unlike it is given that if there is a kind of certain challenges, China will bring it to. And anyway, China has a resident naval power in Indian Ocean, particularly for its flotilla, which continue to maintain in the Djibouti for anti-piracy operation for a long time. So China has a potential also to surge. To what extent, how much, that is a matter of details.
Thank you. That is a very extensive answer. Thank you very much for providing it. I have another question from the chat on YouTube, from Thomas Poswiat, who asks, in your view, what could be India's place, role, and influence in 2050? So we're talking long term, I guess.
Okay.
I know, a big question.
No, I have. I remain like seeing things in a long term. What we perceive today, I am little hesitant to take a call. Now, best case scenario is that in long term, potentially world will be a better place to live in. We all will be good people. Society will be free of all the problem which we perceive. Nation states will forswear their power politics and be like a good citizen. I mean, these are the optimism which we can have. In say, I will limit myself for a little shorter time frame. Uh, India, as a country, it still has a youthful profile. Uh, Economic trajectory at this stage looks optimistic. Uh, so hence we expect that India's economic growth in near terms is will be fairly better than average global growth. Now, as India, and again, these are positive indicators of India's power potential in the region. However, we also are very acutely conscious of that we have a large population which is still poor in a if we define in a terms, and we need to uh, place them in a economic growth trajectory, provide them. So India has a responsibility in terms of a welfare states. uh, our challenges, both regional and global, are also continue to exist. I mean, they are not going to go away. I just said that even if we continue to say dial down a bit from our confrontationist behavior from China, those tension will continue to exist. And my view is shaped by the historical study of past 75 years of our bilateral relationship. Similarly, major geopolitical churning which challenge in India itself is where the other world, we are no country is an island. We are all connected. What's happening in Europe is going to shape the global geopolitics one way or another. Even if it get resolved, it will have a bearing, it will have a repercussion all over. So we are in a era of uncertainty. Only thing certain is that probably India is in a at a point which is relatively looks better in terms of the country's economic growth. Beyond that, everything remains uncertain.
Well, that is the correct answer. We are in uncertain times. No one can argue with that. I think John Batty has a question. You just unmute yourself. You're still unmuted. Let's see if I can. So on the bottom, at the end, at the bottom of your screen, you should see, if you hover or over it, there should be an unmute button. If you can't find it, then you can also write your question on the chat. Which is let's see. I unfortunately don't have. I am moderator. I don't have enough power to unmute participants. So that's something we should change. Because also would give me the power to mute them. Well, if that's it's not a problem. You can also write your question in the open chat. Again, there's a button at the end, or on the YouTube chat.
Yeah.
Oh no, yes, we have you. We have you.
Right.
Excellent.
Britain recently obtained 2 large aircraft carriers, one of which it sent sailing round to the Far East, I think together with some Americans, saying, at least on the British news, that it was going to ensure the safety of maritime travel in the Far East, to maintain the security of it. But what you've been describing very understandably is what China wishes to do. I maintain, for example, its incoming oil supplies. And indeed, if one goes back before probably what we would call the early Middle Ages in Europe, there was, before the European countries ventured into the Far East, didn't realize how to get there by sea, there was a great deal of trade between India and China and that part of the world. And in fact, the imperial powers, when they moved into the area, then used it very much for their own benefit, of course, man being as he is. So how now does India feel about Western countries? America, of course, moved in early as well into places like the Philippines, didn't they? How does India feel about these Western countries moving into the area, trying to assert their authority and produce a rhetoric, at least for their own people, about they're doing it all for the good of the world, when India must surely know that it could do very well together with China and other countries in the Far East without their help?
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And it's a very good question. Now, India's approach to extra-regional presence, particularly extra-regional presence of the Navy, has evolved considerably. At one time, not long back, throughout the Cold War till about 80s, India had a very negative view of extra-regional naval presence in the Indian Ocean. I mean, we are not talking about wider region. India was more concerned with what happens in Indian Ocean. And fundamentally, if you know about the proposal for Indian zone of peace, India was one of the early signatory. We quickly moved out, but at that time, fundamentally, because this extra regional naval presence was being viewed in India in a negative terms, because the kind of experiences, particularly as you mentioned of the colonial time, but more so important was the coercive influence of the naval power as it plays out in 1971 India-Pakistan war with the sailing of a American aircraft carrier, in the midst of the operation by India. However, since then, India has been largely amenable to uh, presence of navies or a collaborative approach within the navies to maintain something called a good order at sea. Good order at sea is fundamentally defined as that uh, people will countries who are free to pursue their activities enshrined in the United Nations law convention, UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and on that matter, and that requires a collective endeavors to keep the sea lanes free from any kind of interference, both from state or non-state. And that's the kind of collaboration the principally, again, at one time United States itself had come to propagate something called a 1,000 ship navy. Idea was fundamentally that navies of the world will work together for the collective goods to ensure that sea lines of communications remains uninterrupted and uninterruptible. Now, India's views towards the Britain's presence in the Indo-Pacific region, India considers is as a welcome decision to be involved and act as a shaping the regional good order at sea and provide stability. So we do not have a negative view of the Britain's presence. Rather, when British aircraft carrier toured this region, fundamentally signal from India was, "Where have you been for so long? We should have been here. You, why did you detached yourself?" So we my personal, my view and broad what I get a sense from reading from the analyst in India, that extra regional presence of the naval presence in the Indian Indo-Pacific region is broadly good for stability, and hence that's the particular region India continue to engage with other partners who are not, and India's own articulation of Indo-Pacific region is that both the region is for people in the countries within the region and beyond, inclusive character of Indo-Pacific.
Thank you. And we needed to have a question on freedom navigation operations, right? Couldn't live without one. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer. So let's see, if we are approaching the end of this session. I'm also aware of the time in New Delhi, so we need to get towards to a close. Let's see if there are any additional questions. None in the chat. If anyone here has, otherwise I do have a couple of questions. But I would love to give the floor to somebody who hasn't spoken yet. Well, in the meanwhile, I'm just going to ask. We were mentioning the future, right? Where is India in 2050 or a little bit earlier? Maybe I want to push in that direction, but tying back to the presentation and the last slides, you were talking about three possible future avenues between India and China: restraint and ambivalence, estranged neighbors, so coexistence. I don't know if it's peaceful or not, and armed conflict. I know I'm not gonna say what is the most likely. I'm not gonna ask for that. But what are the factors that could lead into either of the three? So which one are we in right now, and which is, and what circumstances need to change for it to move into one of the other two avenues, or the three if we are not in either of these?
Okay, actually, at present, we are in strange neighborhood. Fundamentally, that's is a strange neighborhood is essentially a uh, Cold War sort of approach where uh, you are restraining each other means that you are maintaining level of tension between the two countries. You are not allowing the approach which could lead to amelioration of the tension between the two countries. Whatever can continue rest all. And fundamentally, because of this trans neighborhood approach, the countries respond even to the normal behavior in a different manner. You may have seen about the recent approach of India's banning 51 Chinese apps, and very strong reaction from China towards that end. Similarly, each time the foreign minister makes a statement or of something which is even not even peripherally connected, there is a very strong reaction from China. So we are in a kind of estrangement. While, of course, for the sake of engagement and continue to engagement, we continue to talk even on a border dispute basis, but without any progress. India has been unambiguously signaling that unless there is a definitively verifiable behavior, we aren't going anywhere else. China is saying probably if we want us to uh, do some verifiable changes, probably India needs to shape its approach. So we are in a kind of a stalemate here, and that's what I defined as a strange neighborhood situation, which is essentially not good. What we essentially needs to go back is to restrained ambivalence, or what I call it in my book, I call it as a competitive coexistence. That wherein we recognize that we continue to have a differences, however, we will continue to maintain good neighborly relations to progress, and will continue to means that we will continue to compete, we continue to cooperate and coordinate. So that's the approach where we need to be headed back. But that will only happen, as of now, it appears till such time there is a definitive dial down. Now, as we have gone into the second winter on the very high mountain and nearly inhospitable terrain, we are nearly permanent. So, at one time, line of actual control was different than what the border with our Pakistan behaved. Now, both borders are sounding similar, and that's where is the constraint which is there. Is India is not comfortable with that approach, but again, the national security imperatives mandates a firm uh, hand or a firm approach towards these coercive behavior from the Chinese side. So that's where we are. We hope that we will go back to, but that requires a definitive behavioral change, expectation of a behavioral change from China, which as of now, which seems unlikely. So that's where we are, and I think that probably if we continue to go along this path, many analysts argue that probably we are seeing a kind of Cold War redux, not between only India and China, but actually broader bifurcation between the camps which will play in the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you. Again, the question about the future, and excellent answer in that. So we are running towards the end of the event, but there is one last question in the chat. Would you be happy to answer that
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well?
please, please.
Okay. So our question is from Raja Kundu, who is another one of the CCW fellows here. So he asks, what do you see as the impact in the global commons of this competition? I assume Indo-China competition, specifically including outer space, cyberspace, and outside the Indo-Pacific. So we're moving beyond potentially the scope of the talk, but this
Okay.
is how it has been phrased.
No, okay. Norms of the global commons are fundamentally shaped by consensus between states. Uh, as of now, everybody should be concerned about this, that progressively fragility of the consensus between the states on the issue what you define as a global common. and these contestation prevents a stability in the global commons, and that should be a common worry for the strategic analyst all over. uh, Fundamentally, a kind of even though we see Cold War in a negative light, but kind of agreement which the UNCLOS and kind of divergent view was harmonized through UNCLOS processes, and countries agreed to sign at this stage. Those kind of agreements are unlikely. I mean, there is one hope. Again, I'm just saying, I'm not being pessimistic, I'm hopeful. Particularly climate change discourse and the norms and voluntary agreement by the countries to abide by those agreement would have some amount of diffusion of harmonization approach in others. But again, so far we are seeing climate change processes also a commitment in terms of verifiable behavior is yet to kick in. So if we are able to, countries are willing to follow through the public commitment given in the climate change or COP26 behavior, probably it will have a it will influence progression on other fronts as well. Otherwise, probably we are I mean, again, if you are saying cyberspace or even you are talking technology, say lack of standardization uh, in a future technology is going to divide us very seriously in order to progress the interoperability which we need. So let's see that how it progresses. But I'm one thing I'm concerned at present, that getting a general consensus on any issue of the in a multilateral forum is extremely challenging, and let's hope that things becomes better from what they are presently.
Oh yeah, good to be helpful always, and but also still good analysts, which is your case, Commodore Singh. Thank you very much for your answer. First of all, for the overview of China-India relations, not just from the India, but especially from the Chinese perspective. It was extremely interesting. Extremely also interesting to know and to realize, to note that Sino-India relations are no longer asymmetric. We are always talk about China's rise to power, but other countries are rising too. So good point in there. Thank you very much for your overview of history, of important concepts, of everything that really gave us a broader understanding, not just leaving it to the here and now. And to conclude, I just want to remind the audience, well, thank you very much for staying with us this time. Next week, we will return to in-person events. Of course, Commodore, you are welcome to join us if you happen to drop by Oxford. But next talk is going to be in 1st of March. It's going to be in person at All Souls. We're going to have Professor where is it? I lost it. Oh, yes, the talk is going to be on major ideas and ideologues in far right movements by Professor Newman. So back to Europe for discussion and to a different topic. And two last points of order. One is that our war game is about to be launched. We're going to run an online war game as a repetition of what we did last year. It's fantastically organized by some of our committee members. The team will explore the intersection between cyber and outer space security. So again, very broad and very exciting. You will receive a link to sign up really soon via email. So look out for that. And as last point, we are running towards the end of this committee, and me and Anna will conclude our term at the end of this term. We will conclude our offices here. So we're still looking for people to participate and to be involved in the committee. So if you are a student at Oxford, do not hesitate to write to us and see whether you would like to participate in the activities of OUSSG. Well, on that note, I will conclude the streaming. Thank you for the YouTube streaming. Thank you very much, Commodore Singh.
Thank you very much, and I hope that you will keep me in your loop.
Yes.
Will love to join you and your discussion. It has been a great learning experience for me, and I wish to remain in touch. So thank you very much to you and your colleague, and it has been wonderful knowing you. And I hope and wish that beyond that we will remain in touch. My email, if you your colleagues wishes them, you can share them, and
Sure.
love to. I just noticed your Twitter handle, so I have just commented,
Yes.
and we will remain in touch. Thank you
Yes.
very much. It has been pleasure speaking to you all.
Thank you very much indeed, and we shall be in touch. Bye bye.
Thank you.